Good afternoon and welcome to today's Roads and Bridges webcast. Our topic is The Road Ahead, Key Policy and Leadership Shifts in Transportation Safety, sponsored by the American Traffic Safety Services Association, aka ATSSA. I'm Gavin Jenkins, Senior Managing Editor of Roads and Bridges, and I will be moderating this session. Before we dive into today's presentation, let me explain how you can engage with us during the webinar. If you encounter any technical issues, please type your concern into the Ask a Question box beneath the video window on your screen, and a member of our team will assist you. We also encourage you to submit your questions throughout the event. We will address as many as possible during the Q&A session after the main presentation, but feel free to send in questions at any time during the presentation using the Ask a Question box. Lastly, please note that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Roads and Bridges website within the next week. You will receive an email notification once the recording is live. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Cameron Greene is the Vice President of Government Relations at ATSSA. Cameron leads ATSSA's advocacy program, working on issues related to work zone safety, roadway safety infrastructure funding, and innovations in roadway technology, all with the goal of reaching zero fatalities on our nation's roadways. Prior to ATSSA, Cameron worked in the Capitol Hill offices of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Congressman David Cicilline. We're excited to have Cameron join us today, so let's turn it over to Cameron.
Great. Thanks, Gavin, and I appreciate you all having me and the opportunity to speak to your audience today. And as Gavin mentioned on the top, we're going to talk a little bit about how does the election kind of shift how we look at transportation on the policy side, on the legislative side, and how does what's already happening both in the White House and in Congress affect the future of the industry, and what are kind of the key challenges that we face here in the coming months, in the next couple of years. And so I think in order to set the stage, it's important that we kind of talk about who's who are the players, and who are we working with for the next at least 2 years. So we won't do an entire election deep dive. I think we all, by at this point, know kind of what the outcome was. But again, just to set the scene, obviously in the House, Republicans were able to retain the House, which means that House leadership remained the same. We still have Speaker Johnson and Minority Leader Jeffries as the top two members of Congress on their side of the aisle. We obviously always focus on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which is the authorizing committee for all the highway programs and projects that ATSSA members work on. That committee leadership remained the same. Sam Graves, who has been leading the Republicans on that committee for 4 years, was able to retain a waiver from Republicans to serve a third term as the top member of a committee. Republicans self-imposed a 2-term limit, but they agreed to let Chairman Graves have a third term. He's from Missouri. And then on the Democratic side, Rick Larsen from Washington remains the ranking member of that committee. I will say a lot of people, I think, when they talk about Congress, they look at division and partisanship. On the T&I committee, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Larsen do work really well together, and that goes for both committees I'll talk about here today. I think transportation is an issue that does seem to find a way to unite both sides. I know we always say there's no Republican roads and no Democratic roads, there's just roads, and that really rings true here on these committees. The subcommittee that we focus on the most is the Highways and Transit Subcommittee under the T&I Committee. David Rouser from North Carolina takes over from Rick Crawford as the top Republican on that committee, and Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's the D.C. delegate, remains as the longtime top Democrat on that subcommittee. The T&I committee is the largest committee in all of Congress. There's over 70 members on that committee. And on the subcommittee alone, there's also 55 members, which is the largest subcommittee in Congress. So there's a lot of interest from members of Congress who want to get onto the T&I committee because they look at it as a way in which they can get things done. And it's one of the few committees that doesn't have the grandstanding and partisan division that we do see across Capitol Hill. And it's a Congress that I really do enjoy working with. On the Senate side, at the top of the Senate, we know that Mitch McConnell stepped down as lead Republican after a long term there. John Thune becomes the majority leader as our Senate Republicans were able to flip that from Democratic control. Chuck Schumer moves from majority leader to minority leader, but still remains as the top Democrat. On the Environment and Public Works Committee, which is the Senate authorizing committee for highway programs, Shelley Moore Capito goes from ranking member to chair, and a new member of Congress of the Senate steps in for Tom Carper, who retired in that Sheldon White House from Rhode Island. I think as Gavin introduced, I used to work for the senator and know that both him and Senator Capito get along well, and this is a committee that I think is really looking to get things done in the next couple of years as well. So a really strong committee. You see a few new members there, but a much smaller committee than we saw on the T&I side. The changes in the administration, obviously we know there's a new president. The new president gets to appoint a new Secretary of Transportation, and that Secretary of Transportation is Sean Duffy. The Secretary Duffy used to serve as a member of Congress for 8 years. He is originally he's from Wisconsin and represented the district in Wisconsin during those 4 terms. When he doesn't have a ton of legislative history working on transportation issues, we can only kind of parse together what his views on transportation are kind of prior to his nomination through some of his views. Definitely on the manufacturing side, he comes from the kind of anti-China, pro-domestic manufacturing wing of the Republican Party, and kind of let that be known during his nomination hearing. But also during his nomination hearing, one thing we were really excited to hear him talk about was that roadway safety is a top priority for him. And he just, from everyone I've talked to already in DOT and in the administration, they've kind of repeated that this for him is a real topic of interest and a real priority for the department. So I know we're really excited to work with Secretary Duffy and the new folks who are going to be over there, and the career folks who have been over at the Department of Transportation as we look to try to get roadway fatalities below 40,000 for the first time in a long time. He received bipartisan support throughout his nomination process, which again shows that he's a candidate that is both sides of the aisle think can get the job done. And again, we're excited to be working with him at ATSSA. So I mentioned a couple of times for the next 2 years as a time frame in which we are really focusing on, and that's because the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, or the Infrastructure Bill, or there's 10 different names for it. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is the official name for it, expires on September 30th, 2026. The IIJA was passed in 2021, and it was a 5-year bill that provided roughly $30 billion for safety programs along the life of that bill. And it was a bipartisan bill. Like I said, these committees are typically committees that get things done, and they bring members of Congress across the aisle to work together. And we saw that with the IIJA. We saw that a group of 20 bipartisan senators kind of were the ones who drafted the bill. They received bipartisan support pretty heavily in the Senate. When it got to the House, it got a little bit trickier. But in the end, 13 Republicans crossed over the aisle to vote for the package and ultimately get it passed. The IIJA was a historic investment in roadway and infrastructure funding. The total package was about $1.2 trillion, which is obviously a huge number. When we talk about this bill, we're really excited. We were really excited by the historic investment made in safety. The Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is the core federal aid highway program that funds a lot of the safety projects that ATSSA members work on, increased from around $2.6 billion annually under the FAST Act, the previous bill, up to about $3.3 billion annually in IIJA. We also saw a real investment made in rural road safety and in tribal road safety, which we thought for a long time Congress has sort of overlooked, and also a real focus in vulnerable road user safety. I always struggle to say that, which focuses on bike and pedestrian safety. As we talk about what we'd like to see in the next bill and what ATSSA members are going to be talking about when they're up here in Washington, D.C. in the first week of April as part of our fly-in, is we really want to see the continued investment in safety made by Congress. We've seen, I mentioned that 40,000 fatality number. And really prior to IIJA and this huge safety investment, if you look at the numbers from ATSSA, that we're really starting to skyrocket, and we're getting up to 42,000 and 43,000, close to it. And we've really invested in safety and really seen that number sort of plateau. Obviously, 40,000 is still a number that we want to try to get much closer to zero. But we've seen that investment in safety works, and that's kind of what we're talking about right now. We know that the investment, our next kind of, as we build off the investment in safety, that we've seen a real area of concern is work zone safety, an area that is kind of next on our checklist to make sure that Congress takes a look at and can start to address. I know we lose roughly a little over 100 workers each year in work zone crashes. I know we lose, I think, something like 800 total fatalities in work zones, including motorists. And work zones are really an overlooked area of safety. And at ATSSA, we've really already started the discussions with members of Congress to make work zone safety a priority. We've actually just launched a new coalition along with another industry partner to make work zone safety a priority of this next reauthorization. So that kind of gives you a sneak peek into what we would like the next reauthorization to look like. Again, it's a reinvestment in safety, continue to invest in safety because it's shown to lower fatalities. And let's try to make sure that we protect the people who are out on our roadways doing this life-saving work. They should be afforded the same safety that they are trying to provide for those motorists. So we'll kind of talk about what is now the politics of this bill, because you can't talk about legislation without talking about the politics of it. So the first question you have to look at is, what are Republicans looking to cut from IIJA? If you ask any Republican how they think about IIJA, they think it's too big. They think there's too many programs. And really the number one thing they're looking to do is, well, what do we not need this time around? I think we've already seen from some of the executive orders and some of the language from the administration is that if you work in the EV sector, the kind of resiliency, climate, Green New Deal section, as they kind of refer to it, then those are already the programs that are under a microscope from this administration and from Congress. They really want to get back to a focus on traditional infrastructure spending. So that is kind of, I put traditional in quotations because that's kind of how they phrase it. And that's kind of your roads and bridges safety. That's making sure that we are getting the money to fund the projects that benefit everyday Americans who are trying to get home from work, from school, and make sure they get home safely. And that's really where they have kind of wanted to focus this investment. I know they have criticized the IIJA for having some social infrastructure spending, and they want to kind of get it back to a traditional infrastructure spending. The big, I guess, in the IIJA's case, $1.2 trillion question, that won't be this large this time around, is how do we pay for a bill? And I don't have an answer, and neither does Congress, which is, if that sounds alarming, it should. As part of the IIJA, Congress directed DOT to create a pilot program to test vehicle miles traveled, user fee-based system, which essentially would track how much someone drives in their vehicle, and you would get charged a fee based on that, and that money would go to the Highway Trust Fund. That pilot program has not been even started yet by DOT, and we are 4 years into the bill, so you can see kind of progress that's been made towards finding a solution. Why do we need a solution? Because the Highway Trust Fund is currently and to take it back a step, the Highway Trust Fund is where all the funding for federal aid highway programs comes out of. So it gets paid into, it's a user fee-based system, ideally, from your gas and diesel federal excise tax. So every time you go to the pump, you actually pay, what you don't know is a lot of people don't know, is you pay a federal fuel tax, and that money goes right to the Highway Trust Fund, which goes directly into reinvesting that into roads. It's a user fee-based system. And when it was put into place in 1993, it was a great solution. The issue with that was in 1993, they failed to index it for inflation. Obviously, we know gas is much more expensive now, but the tax rate has not kept up with that. And we've seen a lot of the integration of electric vehicles and fuel-efficient vehicles into the roadway system, which electric vehicles currently pay nothing into the Highway Trust Fund on the federal level. So it's trying to find ways in which we can plus up the Highway Trust Fund so we can fund this investment of roadway safety. In the past, in IIJA, in the last couple of bills, we've seen general fund transfer from the Treasury into the Highway Trust Fund to backfill and pay for those projects. Republicans are much less likely to do so than a ton of Democrats were, and that's kind of where the politics of how we pay for this bill comes into place. So now, how does the process for this work? Right now, in Q1 of this year, most of it will consist with the Senate, EPW, and House T&I committees holding hearings related to reauthorization, related to different aspects of it. And I'll touch on a hearing I would like, if you have time tomorrow, to focus on to take a look at. But really, it's ways that these committees can hear from different stakeholders in different areas that are going to be impacted by this legislation, to hear what their priorities are, what their pain points are, and as they work to draft the bill, take all that input and have it into a package that kind of works for industry, for their state DOT partners, and for Congress. Committees will start receiving priority from members and stakeholders towards the end of this quarter into Q2. And we've heard timelines as aggressive as the fall of this year to have a bill drafted into possibly the beginning of next year. And as, again, a reminder, all of these dates, you see the 2026 number for a possible draft being done. The entire bill expires September 30th of 2026. So that's how little time we have to draft a bill, have it be able to pass, get bipartisan support, and have it pass through both chambers. So even though 2 years sounds like a long time, we are really kind of getting down to the wire here. I mentioned how do we pay for it, and kind of touched on the Highway Trust Fund. It's really going to be the biggest question and maybe the biggest holdup to how do we get a bill passed. If Congress can't come to an agreement on how we pay for this bill, we may come to a real standstill, and there really isn't a great solution. I would love to say, hey, go out there and tell your member of Congress to support this or this or this. There's a lot of different opinions on what the best solution forward is, but there kind of isn't one that's been accepted and is being pushed in one direction unilaterally. There are a lot of issues with a lot of the different proposals out there on how we create a new user fee-based system. We don't want to keep relying on having to have the Treasury bail out the Highway Trust Fund. It was created as a user fee-based system, and we would like it to remain that. I did mention kind of on the hearings portion that there is a hearing that if you have some time, I'll just maybe take some time to check out. It's a hearing related to roadway safety on the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit in the House T&I Committee. We actually have, ATSSA has our chair-elect is going to be testifying and talking all about a lot of the things I've just spoke about in terms of priorities and why we need to invest in roadway safety, a lot of the pain points the industry feels on the contractor and manufacturer level, and really wants to bring that. We're going to bring those to Congress tomorrow and talk about why safety needs to be a priority in this bill. And I think in talking with the staff and the members of Congress, they understand that safety should be the priority in any bill that we draft. So I know congressional hearings maybe aren't the most exciting thing in the world to watch, but if you do have some time at 10 a.m., maybe at least check out the opening remarks and some of the opening questions from the chair and ranking member, and just to see kind of a little deeper dive into some of the things I've touched on here today. We've seen some challenges already in the first couple of, I guess, the first really month of President Trump's administration. We know on Inauguration Day, he signed that whole flurry of executive orders. We have seen some industry issues pop up from them, maybe not which was the intent of the executive order. We know there was an executive order as part of that Inauguration Day blitz that kind of froze funds towards highway programs. It was an EO related to it was supposed to be related to Green New Deal priorities, but the way in which they wrote it kind of froze all highway programs and projects. We saw another one that came out about a week after that last month. That was kind of the bigger news item, which was that federal freeze in general. As we just saw how highway funds work, they come through the federal government, and therefore they were also maybe possibly frozen. That was obviously reversed shortly after. We also have seen the threat of tariffs that have come in and gone out and come in and gone out. And we don't really know. I know as of yesterday, there was a new tariff kind of EO. So we'll see where that all falls. And we really haven't seen, I know one of kind of the campaign promises was to curb inflation, and we really haven't seen that yet as of now. But I know we're ready to work with the administration to see how we can bring construction costs down for all of our members. All of these kind of go into one bucket, and that is that uncertainty is bad for our industry. We understand that the president has an agenda that he ran on, and we just want to make sure that roadway safety is not impeded in any way, and that uncertainty for our members is really something that can be really detrimental to the industry. And just quickly, a couple other challenges that we're dealing with right now. For those of you familiar with some of the Buy America provisions and language, you may have seen that right before the administration switched over, FHWA released a final rule related to a manufactured products waiver. That waiver had been in place since 1983, and the final rule goes on to state that the waiver will no longer be in place. That opens up a lot of products to have to comply with the Buy America regulations, which means that 55% of the cost of of the components of your products must be made in America. It's an issue that, while we agree with the idea that under Buy America that we want to bring manufacturing and jobs back to America, we want to make sure it's done in a way that and implemented in a way that is fair for our members and is able to accomplish that goal without completely undercutting the safety of the traveling public. We have real worries about the implementation, about the certification process, about uniformity across certification of all 50 states. We've seen some estimates from FHWA themselves that said this rule could exceed $8 billion in cost over a 10-year period that would fall on manufacturers, contractors, and state departments of transportation. We've really pushed to see if FHWA, we could work with them to find some targeted waivers for some of the ATSSA member products that are going to be really impacted by this rule change. And we asked for a federal clearinghouse or a federal APL or QPL that would allow for member products to be certified in a manner that doesn't kind of bog them down with paperwork. And just kind of one last thing on this, if you are a little bit more interested in the Buy America stuff, just some key things to remember as we talk about the manufactured products waiver is that the key dates here, October 1st of 25 this year, is when your product must meet the final assembly requirement. It's pretty self-explanatory. The final assembly must take place in the United States. And October 1st of 26 is when the 55% rule that I mentioned comes into play. That stipulates that your product must meet the 55% of the cost of components must be made in America. And so those are the kind of main takeaways there. And so I think next I know there's been some questions here in the chat. So I'm going to, and actually I think I'm going to turn over to Gavin I know you kind of have some questions.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much for that, Cameron. We greatly appreciate you sharing the insightful presentation with us today. We have already received several questions, so let's dive right into the Q&A. If you would like to submit a question, simply type it into the Ask a Question box and click Send. So let's get started with that. We will start with the first one we have here is, how could this Surface Transportation Reauthorization differ from what we saw with the IIJA?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it comes down to how it was drafted. We saw an IIJA, and there's a term of regular order that gets thrown around in Congress a lot about here's the proper pathways to write a bill and to pass a bill. And not that the IIJA was done in a way in which, like I mentioned, 20 senators got together and kind of drafted the bill that ultimately became law. An ideal way to do this is what they're doing now, where each committee on each side of each chamber holds their own hearings. We get together and we get a true bipartisan House and Senate input bill. I mentioned the politics and how with a Republican drafted bill, which this is going to be, because the Republicans have both the House, Senate, and the White House, there's going to be a real focus on their priorities. The good thing in this is that roadway safety is a priority of both chambers. I know I said the Republican roads, Democratic roads thing, and that is true. And I've talked with members of both sides of the aisle and the staff on both sides of the aisle, and they want to invest in safety, and they know that investment is working. So I think it'll be more on the process, and we'll see, like I mentioned, some of the programs and projects that'll be impacted with the Republicans trying to kind of cut back on some of the spending and the size of the package, but roadway safety should remain untouched.
All right. This next question comes from Mark, and it's a really good one. A handful of individual states and DOTs have been passing state laws for work zone safety efforts, i.e. work zone automatic speed cameras, new driver required work zone safety training. Are there any efforts at the national level for work zone safety for these types of effective items?
It's a great question, because it's a question that I look for solutions all the time on it. And what Mark mentioned there is completely accurate. States have found real success with finding ways to implement work zone safety in their own state. We've seen, I know a lot of states are doubling fines for speeding in work zones. We've seen automated enforcement become a thing, slow down, move over laws. And so we're seeing it at the state level. At the federal level, it is difficult because, one, states are already kind of taking it on their own to do these things. And one thing the federal government doesn't love to do is come in over the top of states and put one federal law down on something that states are kind of already doing their own. So at the federal level right now, we look at this first off as an awareness campaign and getting members of Congress to realize that we have a real safety issue out on our roadways. I mentioned like 100, I think the exact number, but over 100 construction workers dying each year in work zones is a number that is far too high. And bringing that to their attention has been a big thing. And they're just not, a lot of people don't realize, and there's a public awareness part of this, that they don't realize that when they see a red and blue light on the side of the road, they know that there's law enforcement or a first responder, and they slow down and move over. That a lot of that has to be the same when you see an orange sign or a work zone approaching sign. So all I have to say, there is some federal efforts and some kind of more niche programs to find ways to get dollars towards work zones. But right now, especially, we're working to get this in front of a lot of members of Congress to bring it to their attention.
All right, let's get you out of here on this one question. How do you think Congress views roadway safety in terms of importance as they draft a bill?
They say it's the most important thing, and I think that is the thing everyone should take out of this is every member that I've spoken to over the last month, new members who've been around forever, when I talk about reauthorization, has said that nothing can be done if we don't do it safely. And I think that is the important thing. I mentioned Secretary Duffy's comments during his confirmation hearing, where he said for him, the priority is safety. So I would say, from everything I've been told, unless they're lying right to my face, that safety is the priority for both of these committees and for Congress and for the administration. I think they look at that 40,000 number, and I don't think it hits home to people a lot of the times that we lose 40,000 people on roadways each year. I think it's like 115 people a day die on our roadways. And that's a number that we need to lower. And I think Congress realizes that. And from everything I've been told and spoken to those folks, they have reiterated that.
All right. There's still a lot of great questions to go that are in the chat here, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. For those questions that we didn't have time to answer, we'll get back to you via email. That concludes today's webcast. On behalf of Roads and Bridges, I'd like to thank Cameron for sharing that great presentation with us. I'd also like to thank ATSSA for sponsoring today's event, and of course, all of you for joining. I'm Gavin Jenkins, Senior Managing Editor of Roads and Bridges. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and join us next time.